One of the things that stood out to me about the series is not a lot of talk about mental health issues and substance use issues. It was portrayed in the show, but it really focused a lot on suicide. And what we know about suicide research, or from research on suicide, is that about 90% of people that complete suicide, it can be traced back to them showing some kinds of signs and symptoms of mental illness in the weeks, months, years leading up to the decision that they made to take their life. So I think we can't really talk about suicide until we talk about mental health, mental illness, mental disorders. So that's what I'm going to spend the first few minutes here tonight doing. So the first thing we have to do is create a working definition for what is mental illness, a mental disorder, a behavioral health issue. You'll hear me use those words interchangeably. And what it is a set of symptoms that impacts every aspect of a person's life. The way they think, the way they feel, the way they relate to others, their ability to attend school, work, and be successful in those areas. If symptoms are showing themselves in only one of those particular areas, then it's probably something situational. Mental illness is something that impacts every facet of a person's life. And it's also very, very common. Stats put it out there that people in this country, about 25% of people, or 1 in 4 people in this country in a given year, struggle with the symptoms of mental illness. So it's people we know, our friends, neighbors, loved ones. And I have this picture up here to show that it is a brain disorder. It is not a choice that someone has a mental illness. So you see on the far, what is that, your left over there? What is a normal brain activity looks like, and as you go across, it's different, some of the different, more common disorders that we see. And not only are they different from the normal one, but they're each different in and of themselves in terms of where the activity level changes in the brain. You'll notice I have a lot of information in these slides that I'm not going to be able to go into every detail, but we will have our PowerPoints available on our website after tonight that you can look at. You'll also have all of our contact information that you can reach out to us if you have specific questions. And we're also taping this, so you'll be able to view segments of this or direct people to segments of this after the fact. Okay, so for the numbers of people out there, I have to put some stats in here to show just how common it is in adolescents, mental illness, mental behavioral health disorders. Almost 32% of kids aged 13 to 18 in America in a given year struggle with an anxiety disorder. Almost 20% with a behavioral disorder, almost 15% with mood disorders, and almost 12% with substance use disorders. What does this slide say? Again, it's common. It's out there. We have to talk about it. If you're wondering why the overall precedence doesn't add up, and we have this number of 22, I have to look over here, 22%. There we go. It's because of comorbidity. Oftentimes people struggle with, or co-occurring, people might struggle with more than one thing. An anxiety disorder might lead someone to use substances, or someone who struggles with a behavior disorder might start to end up showing signs and symptoms of a mood disorder like depression. I'm just going to let you look at this slide for a second because I almost think it speaks for itself. Look how young some of these things start to impact our community. Anxiety disorders as young as age 11, people start to show signs and symptoms of anxiety disorders. I think depression is a little skewed toward an older age group because depression is one of those things that it takes people a long time to really seek help for. There's research out there that say that a person starts to show symptoms 10 years before they actually reach out for help for what they're struggling with. So I think that's where we see a little bit skew for depression to age 32, because I know for sure that that's happening in our young folks. So we have to talk a little bit about adolescent development. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail because you're here because you love an adolescent, so you know about adolescent development. But I have to talk about brain development for a minute. It's obviously a cartoon, but there's a lot of truth to this. So the brain develops from the back to the front. The back of the brain is what controls all of our basic bodily functions, breathing, heart rate, things like that. That's the first thing to develop. That's what keeps us alive. The middle part of the brain right here is our emotions, essentially. That's one of the main things that happen in the middle part of the brain, our ability to express and emote. The very last part of the brain to develop is the very front, the prefrontal cortex. This is what makes people think and act like adults. So it gives us the ability to foresee the consequences of our actions, to be able to look at multiple situations and multiple options and make a decision by foreseeing potential consequences. It's the executive functioning. This is the last part of the brain to develop. And that's important to know because that means that kids have the ability to feel all these very complex emotions, but not necessarily the ability to manage them, because that part, some research studies say that that prefrontal cortex is not developed up until age 25 in some folks. Okay. Adolescent development occurs at very different rates, and I think this picture does a good job of showing that. If you look at, this is a picture of a middle school class. That's what I searched for to find this. A middle school class picture. Look at this baby face right there, right? And then look at this guy up here. They're the same age. Look at Adam's apple, ready to like smack you in the face. And this little, baby face down here. I mean, they're the same age. It just gives you an idea, a picture's worth 1,000 words of how all of this development, all the changes that are occurring physically, mentally, socially, and emotionally are also occurring at very different rates. And even despite all of that that's going on, brain development, physical development, social development, all of that, kids are really, really resilient. Most kids come out of adolescence with relatively little issues. But we're here to talk about those 22% of kids that might struggle with a mental illness. So some of the things that might make a kid more at risk for developing symptoms of a mental illness are here on this slide. There is a genetic component to mental illness. If a person has a parent with a mental illness, they're about 10 to 15% more likely than the general population to have a mental illness. Family dynamics play a key role. For those of you who saw the series, which I'm sure you did, that's why you're here, I think that, why is his name?
Justin.
Come on, Justin. Yeah, I almost said Jesse. Justin, I think his family dynamics really spoke to that. His mom was using substances. She had multiple partners who were abusive coming in and out of the home a lot of times. There really wasn't that much of a stable family environment. That put Justin at really high risk for developing a mental illness. Medical conditions, especially if they involve chronic pain or they have a pretty bad prognosis, can also put a person more at risk. Brain injuries impact our ability to express emotion and process information, which can be a risk factor as well. Social influences, including social media and other types of media, can absolutely have an impact can increase a person's risk. And environmental influence, these are things like socioeconomic status and peers and what's going on in the community has an impact on the kids. And traumatic events, which I'm not going to go into because we have a whole section. Marjorie does a great job of that, so I'll leave that to her. There are also tons of things out there that make a kid less likely or protect a kid from possibly struggling with mental illness. So I think that Clay's mom, the fact that she, his family, they had a stable sort of home environment. She was very in tune to what was going on with Clay. She couldn't put her finger on it right away, but she was in tune to what was going on in his life, that something was off. She even adapted. That's why I love this picture. We're having breakfast together this morning. She knew her family couldn't do family dinners anymore, so she adapted it to family breakfast because they were all home at the same time. Just sharing a meal together as a family can be a very big protective factor, and that consistent home routine. Also having constructive activities, being part of a team or part of a group, part of a club, having other positive social influences and feeling close to at least one adult. It can be a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, teacher, coach, counselor, absolutely anyone. But if a kid can feel close to even one adult in their lives, huge protective factor. So I think the big thing, probably the big question is, with all the stuff that's going on in adolescence and sort of the storming and norming and heavy emotionality and intensity of being an adolescent, is how do you tell the difference between what is typical adolescent development and what should we worry about? What's a warning sign? And I think this gives you a little bit of an idea of that. So it's one thing for, as a kid, for them not to want to spend as much time with family and spend more time with friends. It's another thing if they're really withdrawing into themselves and not really wanting to spend time with anyone, family or friends, and just spending in their room. That's probably a warning sign, that isolation. It's perfectly normal for an adolescent to want more privacy. Being secretive is very different. Trying to hide information and being secretive. And then obviously changing likes, dislikes, and different pursuits and interests from childlike things to more teen-friendly things, as opposed to losing complete interest in things that were once pleasurable and rewarding to them. Just not really engaging in activities and positive, constructive activities. All right, so we are not going to go into every single type of mental health disorder. We could be here for 3 days doing that. Not to mention that actually in the early signs and symptoms of mental health disorders are actually more similar than they are different, the early warning signs. So I just wanted to have this slide up here to show you some of the things you might hear about, some of the more common mental health diagnoses you might hear about. And also to say that we have to put a label on it, and that sucks. Labels suck, but the truth is we need to put a label on it in order to get services when they're needed. So while someone might show enough signs and symptoms that they fall into the bucket of depression versus bipolar disorder, we have to do that to be able to access services, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. But the reality is, like I said, mental illness affects every aspect of a person's life. Here are some of the common physical symptoms. Mental illness can impact every bodily system. You might hear people complaining of rapid heart rate, stomach issues, anxiety, and even depression too can cause a lot of irritable bowel type symptoms. Unexplained aches and pains can be related to mental health symptoms. Hormonal changes, changes to a girl's menstrual cycle can happen. And also there might be some change in weight, up or down, depending on what's going on with the person. Changes in sleep, appetite, things like that. Also, a person's emotions are affected. They can become depressed or anxious or kind of irritable, oftentimes in the younger the person is, or there's also a difference between males and females in this sense that younger kids and males might be more likely to express depression as anger and irritability rather than sadness and fatigue and things like that. So there are differences. Lack of inhibition if there's lots of excessive spending or promiscuity or things like that, just a lack of inhibition. And I want you to keep in mind that not for all of these symptoms, the slide before and the next couple of slides it's not, the person might not experience all of these things all of the time. The reality is all of us have experienced some of these things at some point in time. That doesn't mean we're struggling with a mental illness. What we want to keep in mind is the number of symptoms, the severity of the symptoms, and how long they last. If it's a short period of time and then it kind of goes away for a while and doesn't come back, it might just have been, a bad moment in time. If it's something that continually comes back and is concerning, then that should pique your curiosity and want to ask more questions of that person. The one thing that I have to draw your attention to is helplessness or hopelessness. Chris is going to talk about that in QPR. If someone is expressing the notion that the way they feel there's no hope in changing it. There's nothing they or anyone else can do to help make their situation better. That is a huge, huge red flag and something to worry very much about and ask a lot more questions about that. Hopelessness and helplessness is pretty much the step before suicidal ideation. So that's something to really pay attention to. Behavioral, the things that you might see in a person, again, that withdrawing into themselves, isolating, not really caring for their personal appearance very well, not managing their responsibilities either for work or school when they once did, if they start to use drugs or alcohol, any kind of, talking rapidly, way more rapidly than I'm talking right now. You can't really get a word in edgewise, that kind of thing is something to be concerned about. Any kind of behaviors that seem compulsive, hand washing is pretty common, with an obsession with germs. Not just wanting to be neat and tidy, but an actual compulsion to do it, not able to function unless that behavior is completed. And non-suicidal self-injury. This is a big one with this group. We're talking about the most common form being cutting. There are other things, burning, pulling hair out. There are all different reasons why a person might engage in this type of behavior. The most common reported is to actually reduce emotional pain. So when there's a self-injury, it, for some people, makes that emotional pain real. And then also there's the physiological piece of it, that when you get hurt, there's all kinds of endorphins going, and you actually do feel better or numb, or there are physiological things going on. So that's something to be concerned about if a kid is engaging in that. Things that might be going on inside the kid's head, racing thoughts, self-criticism, self-blame, just very negative self-esteem, not having difficulty making decisions or concentrating. Again, it doesn't really matter if that's because they're depressed and so their thought process is slower and they're fatigued a lot, or maybe they're starting to hear voices. It could be either, but what it might look like is difficulty concentrating or remembering. Delusions or hallucinations. So delusions are false belief patterns. Some of the most common ones we hear are that the government is tracking me, FBI, CIA tracking me, people are out to get me, I have some high level of fame, fortune, and money coming my way, and I'm expecting it, and the truth is that, that's not really true. Hallucinations are a sensory experience that other people don't have. So you can hallucinate all 5 senses. They can be friendly or frightening, and so these are things that you might see. The most common are auditory and visual, so hearing voices or seeing things. Could be a psychotic disorder creeping up, or as you'll see in the next few slides, could be a substance use issue happening. Again, it doesn't matter if you see this, start a conversation, ask some questions. Not really having lack of insight, not really having an understanding that something might be wrong, that something might be going on. And you'll need to maybe probe a little bit more through that. And of course, thoughts of death and suicide. Talk a little bit about substance abuse, back to brain development just for a second. The part of the brain that's involved in substance use and abuse is the limbic system. That's the brain's reward center, okay? So you introduce, that's where all the dopamine gets flooded, and put a substance in your body and it floods with dopamine and makes you feel good, okay? When people use substances, especially for a long period of time, that system might start to not work as well as it did prior to the introduction of the substance. So then that is where addiction comes in, because the person needs to continue to add that substance to feel good at all. So that's why some people who use substances can become depressed, especially after they stop using substances. Again, that frontal lobe is not developed, that ability to foresee. If I put this heavy substance in my body, yeah, somebody gave me a pill, I don't know what it is, but if somebody I know in life gave it to me, yeah, I'll pop it. Suddenly, within weeks or even less, they might be addicted to that particular medication. Oftentimes, high percentages of people who we treat with substance use disorders have co-occurring mental health disorders. Lots of times the reason why a person goes for a substance is to self-medicate mental health symptoms. And if you think that you might not know anybody who that was the case, all I had to do is direct you to a time when you were maybe at a wedding or some other big event, and you or maybe someone you know said, oh, I need one more drink before I can get out on the dance floor. Maybe self-medicating a little bit of that social anxiety of being in a public space. And then accidental addiction can occur. We see this all the time, people who are injured and prescribed painkillers, and this can happen to adolescents, particularly in the sports world, injured, prescribed painkillers. Suddenly, maybe the prescription goes away and they're looking to get the medication elsewhere because they've developed some kind of addiction to it. So that can happen. And as you can see, at some point, it does become a brain disorder. Again, you see where that limbic system, it's not letting up as much in the drug abuser as compared to the healthy control. Things to be aware of, look at this list of things around the house that kids are abusing. I mean, this probably isn't even exhaustive, but these last few, look, nutmeg and vanilla, I didn't even know about nutmeg, but apparently kids are smoking it and having some kind of high from it. And all kinds of other things that are just found in the medicine cabinet or under the sink or wherever. Most of the ones on your left side, you're aware of: tobacco, alcohol, drugs covers marijuana, methamphetamine, cocaine, things like that. These are the ones that we know a lot about. The party drugs, ecstasy. These are all synthetic pills found in many medicine cabinets. Be aware of what's in your home. And if you have medications that are laying around that you're not using, there's a flyer out on the resource table about prescription drug take-back. That's where a lot of kids are getting access to pills, is right in their own or their friends' medicine cabinets. The synthetic drugs, I'm talking about the K2 and spice and synthetic marijuana. And I have this picture here to show what the packaging looks like, clearly geared toward young folks with all the bright colors and cartoon characters and things like that. Even though it's called synthetic marijuana, it couldn't be more different than the pot from the 60s and 70s. Really, it's probably more akin to, say, a methamphetamine, because all it is some type of leaf, rarely marijuana, usually tobacco or some other kind of leaf, and it's just sprayed repeatedly with chemicals, different chemical combinations. Another type of synthetic drug that is common in this area are bath salts. This is not Calgon, take me away, that they're getting at Rite Aid and ingesting it somehow, but it's again, a combination of chemicals. Different people who manufacture it have different recipes, I guess you could say. And it can cause severe hallucinations, delusions, and violent behaviors. So if you think that bath salts are a part of a situation, be on high alert. So some warning signs that someone might be using. Physical ones are listed there. Nosebleeds if they're inhaling things nasally. They're complaining about frequent nausea, headaches, sudden dramatic changes in weight or appearance. If they're nodding off because they're using a depressant, things like that. The behavioral signs, look at these. You saw these on the signs, behavioral signs for mental health. You saw many of these. It can overlap. Again, doesn't matter whether it's bipolar disorder, depression, or a substance use disorder. These things should pique your curiosity and hopefully cause you to ask questions of the kids in your lives. Being secretive, being hostile, being loud and obnoxious, things like that. And you remember Jessica, she started out drinking like most kids do, at the party, whatever, the big summer party, and then she had a trauma, and then she started abusing. And there were bottles under her bed that she threw away. That quickly turned into addiction after that trauma took place. Social, they might lose, again, change in interests. These are things that we've already talked about, so I don't need to go over them again. One thing that might be a little different, cash flow issues. All of a sudden there's no money, maybe they have a job and their paycheck gets spent pretty quickly and there's not 10 pairs of brand new sneakers to account for where the money went. Things like that, be aware of. Also noticing belongings, if certain things are missing. Pay attention to your meds, pay attention to your money, your wallet, things like that. Or if things start to appear, different smoking devices can be made out of all kinds of things. Tinfoil, toilet paper rolls, all kinds of things. If you're noticing unusual smells, things like that, important to know. So what do you do with all this information? If a kid comes to you, or if you ask a question, you start a conversation, and they say to you, yes, I have been struggling. I've been feeling this way, or I've been doing this. I got caught up with these new friends, and I tried these drugs, and now I don't know how to say no anymore. First thing to do, thank them. Thank them for telling you, for being open and honest and believing in you, that they could trust you with this information. Remind them that they're safe, that you're there, that you will help them figure this out. Most important, be calm. If they're worked up and escalated, probably don't tell them to calm down. Usually, in my experience, the words calm down tend to have the exact opposite effect on a person. But you remain calm yourself. Be aware of how their behavior, their emotions are affecting you. Be very aware of that and remain calm. If they're expressing some pretty odd ideas and odd thoughts, like that you might be thinking they're hallucinating or delusional, don't feed into that. Don't say you agree with them or see what they see or hear what they hear, because what we know about psychosis is that it's not a static condition. It's not something that someone is psychotic all the time, every minute of every day. There's moments of clarity in there, oftentimes. And so they'll probably know that you're not being real with them, that they have some kind of awareness that what they're expressing just isn't right. So what you would want to say instead is, I don't see what you're seeing, I don't hear what you're hearing, but I believe you, and I can see how scared, how angry, how frustrated, insert whatever emotion they're expressing, how it's making you feel, and I want to help. So let's figure this out. And ask questions, have conversations. Always have these conversations coming from a place of curiosity, wanting to know more, wanting to understand. Tell me more about that. If they're a little bit resistant, which it might be, you might want to start out first off by saying what you've seen yourself. What have you noticed? I noticed that you were religiously at practice, every single practice, all the time, early and staying late, and I noticed you missed the last couple. That has me a little concerned. What's been going on? Tell me a little bit about what's going on. This isn't like you. Or I've noticed, you used to be out with your friends every weekend, and now you've been inside the past 4 Saturday nights. What's going on? Tell me what's going on. I'm concerned. Express what you've seen and that you're concerned, and then be comfortable with a little bit of silence. It might take a little while for them to articulate their thoughts, and maybe let them know that if they're not comfortable talking right this moment, that you're there for them when they are ready. And it's also really important to give information and caring statements rather than advice. So maybe they're really upset about a breakup. You as the adult, maybe you've been through multiple breakups and you know this is one experience in a lifetime. They don't. For them, it is, for that person right there in front of you, it might feel like the end of the world for them. Acknowledge that. I know breakups can be really hard. I can see you very upset, very hurt, and I'm here for you when you want to talk. As opposed to, oh, breakups are fine, you'll get over it. Just you'll move on, plenty of fish in the sea. That's kind of like giving advice and minimizing those feelings that are very intense, and that's probably not going to get anywhere. Tons of interventions out there. The only people different types of providers, is the first thing I'll talk about, the only people who can prescribe medication are doctors, typically a primary care doctor or a psychiatrist. The other types of providers listed here, social workers, counselors, psychologists, they do talk therapy, psychoeducation, they do not prescribe medication. Access to care is an important thing to talk about. You'll see out on our resource tables that there's information about Lenape Valley, Family Service Association. There are tons of options for providers out there. And if you're having trouble locating one, please give us a call and we'll help. One thing to know, I have to remind myself to mention the MA loophole. So in Pennsylvania, what MA means is medical assistance. So welfare insurance. Even if a family has private commercial insurance, if a kid has a diagnosable medical or mental health condition, they can be eligible. MA will cover whatever the insurance company doesn't. So if that's something you need to know more about, there's information out on the table. We can help you get more information about that. Because let's face it, mental health care can be, just like any other medical care, can be really expensive, but there are ways to help with that cost. Have to talk about medication with kids for a second. Rarely ever do we start with medication for kids, and rarely ever is it the only option. Always want to talk therapy, coping skills, things like that. The thing about medication with kids is we're very, very careful. There's not a ton of research being done out there because, of course, rightfully so, many parents don't want to say, yeah, sure, do this experiment on my child with this medication that we're not really sure what the side effects are going to be. So a lot of it is off-label usage because it's on adults. It was research using adult study participants. And so the dosing is usually very low to start. It could take weeks to months to get up to effective dosing with psychiatric medications because it's done on a very conservative timeline, making sure there's no reactions, making sure the side effects are manageable, things like that. Also, we have the black box warning that if you have TV and see commercials you've heard about, and most antidepressants and other psychiatric medications have that warning, may cause or increase suicidal thoughts and behaviors in adolescents and young adults starting this medication. So what's that about? I'm giving my kid an antidepressant so they don't have thoughts of suicide anymore, so they don't feel depressed and they're more likely. There's a lot of stuff at play going on there, a lot of theories, lots of hormonal things that we don't know how medications are going to impact, but also sometimes with that low dosing, it might give a person just enough relief of symptoms to have the energy and motivation to follow through on something that they've already been thinking about for a while, but not enough feel good to feel better and to really feel less depressed. So that's where that comes into place. So again, lots of monitoring if medications are being considered with kids. Tons of other types of supports. Not everybody goes to a professional for mental health support and treatment. But peer groups at school or in the community. And I know that in Langhorne we have the teen center. Up in this area we have the Rainbow Room. There are lots of peer-driven things for kids that they can attend to and get support from people their own age who have experienced their own thing. Sometimes it's about exercise and nutrition. Getting the family involved is really important. And of course, not using any illicit substances because that's probably not going to make things better in the long term. If the family or the person doesn't want help, have to find out why. There's so much stigma out there about mental illness. One of the huge motivators for us to do this. So this show, 13 Reasons Why, is out there. We're talking about it. Yes, finally, people are talking about mental health in our community. Let's jump on that and continue this conversation. But there's still a lot of shame and stigma going on when it comes to that. So we want to make sure we get the information out there that mental illness and these signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety and even thoughts of suicide are more common than you might think. They don't have to be acted on, and there is help out there. And there's an entire table full of resources out there that you can give to people to prove that there's help out there. And then, honestly, if kids are expressing, Chris is going to go into this in detail after Marjorie speaks, but if it's an emergency, if a kid is expressing thoughts of suicide, hopelessness, helplessness, things like that, you have to intervene. Whether they want to or not, we have to save. At that point, it's about saving a life, regardless of if the family is going to be resistant to it. So if there are thoughts of suicide, if it's an emergency, there has to be some kind of intervention. Obviously, this is a very broad 25-minute overview. If you want more information on mental health, suicide prevention, things like that. We're having some free trainings coming up. The first one, mental health first aid, that's geared toward adults, but there are seats available for tomorrow and one in June. Then a mental health first aid, it's an 8-hour free training program. We provide lunch as well. And we have one in July and one in August that's geared specifically toward people who are working with youth. So if you want more of this information, you can go onto our website to order it, and we have some flyers out front too to remind you. All right, that's it for me. Thank you.